It is truly hard to believe, but we are getting ready to start our very last panel for the 66th Air Safety Forum. We finished the forum with a completely star-studded panel, including ALPA President Captain DePete and several of the top leaders of our aviation industry, to discuss how we safely integrate commercial space and UAS into the airspace that we fly each and every day. I, for one, have been very excited for this panel, so without further ado, Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Abigail. Thank you, everyone, for our final panel of the Air Safety Forum. It's been a great week. Glad to see everyone ready for the banquet this evening. Going to be a good time. I'm really excited and happy to be a part of this expert panel and to moderate a good discussion on airspace. Airspace integration, working with all the vehicles that we have in the sky, whether it be a large UAV flying beyond the line of sight to one of our classic airliners up into commercial space rockets heading through the airspace. We own none of it, but we want all of it. And that's what this panel is going to talk about is how are we going to integrate all of these vehicles together? Great story, I live on Merritt Island, 9 miles south of the Kennedy Space Center, and it's getting so common that when I see a rocket go up, there's a rocket, and we turn around and go back to doing what we're doing. And it's becoming almost a 3-4 times a week thing. So it's not going to be just there. It's going to be other places around the world. It's not just going to be here in the United States. Like I say, it's going to be a worldwide issue. We're starting to see drones and unmanned vehicles that are going to be flying beyond the line of sight, crossing continents, crossing oceans eventually. So this is a situation and a concern to all of us stakeholders that are here on the stage. For those that had an early agenda, we invited the FAA Administrator, Billy Nolen, to join us. He unfortunately has to be at a White House event today and let us know that he had to attend that, so he sends his regards and appreciated the invitation. But I'd like to introduce the rest of the panel, start off a discussion about airspace, what we're doing, and how we're meeting the efforts to try to get these aircraft and vehicles integrated into our airspace. So to my left, everyone knows Joe DePete, ALPA President. Thank you, Joe, for joining us today. We also have our NTSB Chair, Jennifer Hamady. Thank you for being here. We also have Terry McVenis from RTCA, the CEO of RTCA, former Aviation Safety Chair, U.S. Airways pilot. Thank you for being here, Captain McVenis. As well as Captain Craig Hoskins from Airbus. He is the VP of Security, Safety, and Technical Affairs for Airbus Americas. We have Ms. Karina Dries from the Commercial Spaceflight Federation here, and also Lauren Cass, last but not least, is going to be here speaking with us, discussing issues that involve the drone community. So, to start it out, there's a lot of activity that's going on in the system right now. The FAA has done a really good job of convening all the stakeholders to speak and talk. We have 3 committees that are meeting regarding airspace issues, the Next Gen Advisory Committee, as well as the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee, and we also have the Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee. Now, I'm giving you the scorecard because we're going to drop a lot of acronyms. So you have the NAC, the AAAC, and the ComStack. So you might hear that a few times, but that's how those are spelled out. And what it does is it gets those industry people together, and the FAA has had a really, really fevered pitch pace and pressure to try to get vehicles in the sky. I give them great credit all the way back to Administrator Huerta there's so much pressure from industry to get for-profit vehicles into space as quickly, but the good thing is the FAA has been the backstop to try to keeping it safe and making sure that it's studied and measured, and we continue to stay at the same safe levels we are. We've heard it many times in this forum that we're at the safest position in aviation in our history, and these groups and these folks are here to speak and talk about that and to ensure that we have that same level of safety. So starting out, I'd like to first talk to Karina with the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. And Karina, if you could, do you mind telling us about exactly what the Commercial Spaceflight Federation is doing and what you're doing at the ComStack and the efforts that are being taken by the stakeholders there?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk with you all about space and what space is doing. So first and foremost, I'm the president of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. We're the trade association that represents the commercial space industry. And we've really evolved to represent the entire ecosystem of commercial space. So it's launch and reentry companies, commercial spaceports, satellite companies, manufacturing, in-space habitats, software as it applies to satellite companies, and a lot of service providers as well. So that's really what CSF represents in terms of what's going on within the space community. One of our key roles at CSF is to educate policymakers and regulators about what our industry is and what it is not, and kind of how it's different, and what we're advocating for in terms of, shaping the policy for the industry. So in terms of educating the community about what we're doing, it's really more about how the industry has evolved. And the US government now relies heavily on the commercial space industry to provide services to civil programs, to national security programs. When the Space Force talks about things like resiliency, they're relying heavily on the commercial space industry to do this. And we continue to talk with folks within these communities at NASA and DoD about what our capabilities are, what we're providing. And a lot of folks might say that we're kind of in the midst of another space race. And there's a lot of concerns about whether we're moving fast enough. And so that's one of the things that we're really trying to do, is push to make sure that we're able to keep up the pace with what the demands of the US space program have on us. So some of the things that commercial space companies provide, assets for critical defense programs, civil space programs, critical platforms like GPS, weather monitoring, global communications networks, all of these things are very key to the entire US space program. So we're playing a more active role, CSF that is, in the aerospace integration topic in general, because we recognize that it's one of the critical areas, one of the critical pieces going forward that we'll have to participate in conversations. This year I'll be chairing the ComStack, which is the Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee. We're the industry advisory group to the FAA when it comes to commercial space regulatory issues and other issues that are impacting the industry. We have working groups that focus on regulatory topics, on safety topics, and innovation and infrastructure topics as well. So it's a pretty broad overview of what's happening within the space industry. The other thing I just wanted to mention briefly, I think we're going to discuss this a little bit here in this group, is FAA-ATO recently stood up a collaborative decision-making forum on aerospace integration, and I'm on the steering committee for this, as well as some of the other key launch operators. And this is really where we're starting to focus in on this conversation of aerospace integration. So in addition to the launch operators, there are other aviation groups that are involved in that. We're starting to have more conversations with folks. I really appreciate the invitation here from ALPA to talk about this. We're talking with other aviation groups. We're working with ATCA on their upcoming conference on aerospace integration in November to really give folks a better overview and a better understanding of what space is, what we're doing, what we're launching. And I'll leave it at that for now. If we want to talk a little bit about some of the operational things that we're doing, I'm happy to talk about that.
Great, thank you. Lauren, you've been doing a lot of work. We've worked together on a number of different issues regarding the AAAC work that's happening there. Captain DePete's part of that committee as well. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening at that level, what you're working on regarding integration issues?
Sure. So my background, just real quickly, is I started off a long time ago as air traffic controller. I've been in airline operations for many years. I've retired a couple of times, but I can't seem to stop working. I've been a member of the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee since it was first born as a drone advisory committee a few years back. And the whole idea is, how do we safely integrate all these new vehicles into the airspace? I have to first of all say, really sincere thanks to Captain DePete and ALPA in general, because the contribution to this AAAC has been tremendous from ALPA. It really has. And critically important, not just at the plenary sessions, but there are a lot of working groups and task groups and so forth that ALPA has been there at every one of those, and they've been at the table and they've been providing contribution that you wouldn't get elsewhere. So it's very, very important, and I'm happy to see them there. The good thing about the AAAC, like any other advisory committees, you finally get people in a room and around a table, and in many cases they have a lot of disparate views of what they're doing, where things may be going. These new entrant operators, if you will, this started off, initially we were talking about drones and kind of the smaller drones you'd think of, but it's very quickly moved up to also include the advanced air mobility environment, which if you want to think of package delivery over some distances, regional air mobility, think of the eVTOL environment, a lot of electric stuff, hybrid eVTOL, and a lot of this is going to provide benefits, and it's going to be additive to the community. I think initially, some of the new entrants, first of all, I've met some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life that know how to make these vehicles do things that I never imagined you could do. But at the same time, many of them didn't really have a background in the aviation community. So I think the ability to get around the table with all these different interests has been very, very key. And right now, the industry chair of the AAC is Captain Houston Mills, and he is a UPS person of safety, and he brings a unique perspective because his company obviously is operating the legacy aviation operations, as well as a future where they'll probably have some advanced air mobility vehicles. But getting in a room and getting together is important. The AAAC has talked about a lot of areas. I think the most important one, and it started with the first task group that I was involved with, involves sort of opening up this idea of safety as a culture. And for us that have been in legacy aviation for many years, that's just kind of secondary. And we went through this 30, 40 years ago of trying to understand how to better share information and get into these safety management systems that really work and mean something and plan for tomorrow. And some of the newer community, to the smallest operator, I was talking to a small group one time of model aircraft flyers. And you can imagine a gentleman that was there, he'd been flying his P-51 model for 20 years, and then all of a sudden somebody told him he's a UAV and he's got to do SMS. And so he didn't understand what that meant. But getting everybody around the table is important. The AAAC has talked about safety, and I think the good news is safety is now one of the first words out of people's mouth, as well as the last. Talked about, we had a subgroup that was talking about gender neutrality. Well, at first I thought, well, that's kind of an odd place for this to be, but the whole idea is we have to get a more diverse circle of operators in the new community and the old working together. Then we had one that was about education, and I've always thought about STEM education. I've always thought about getting young people interested in aviation, and I've always thought about that as being high school. This went all the way back as K through 12, and I thought, wow, that's really early. But when you see some of the things that are being done out there and can be done, it was tremendous. And there's going to be a lot more coming out of that. We're now talking about specific integration framework, and there's more work to come. But getting everybody in the room together and around the table is huge. I know we'll talk a little bit later about connecting some of the dots of all this work that's being done. But the AAAC is a good place to be, a good starting point. The BVLOS, this Beyond Visual Line of Sight Rulemaking Committee, finished its work, was sort of an outgrowth of the AAAC, and now some real regulatory stuff will finally be coming in place. So, thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Good efforts with your team and the group there, because like you say, safety culture wasn't even spoken in that group until just recently, and we were glad to help you out, try to get those folks on board by understanding the data sharing and the culture. So thank you. Captain Hoskins, question for you. You're working with the Next Gen Advisory Committee. Can you fill us in on a little bit of some of the efforts that are going on at that level and what's of importance when regarding airspace integration?
Sure. Thank you, Steve, and thanks for having me on the panel. It's interesting with the Next Gen Advisory Committee to kind of set the table, if you will, a little bit. I've been a part of it for 3 years, and it was a very eye-opening and an enriching experience. And for those of you, I'll date myself a little bit. If you remember when you first got the internet, and it was the dial-up, and the first time you started flying with TACAN, VOR, NDB, when this next gen thing came along, everyone thought it was like a light switch. You know, hey, you know what? I'm going to go right from dial-up to turn on the light switch, and everything's going to be perfect. And it's taken time, and it's a growth in progress. However, a lot of progress is being made. And to kind of take a look at the NAC, if you will, it's more than just a meeting, 2 to 3 times a year, because there's a lot of work behind the scenes that go into it. And I have the honor, too, to share a seat, share the NAC with Captain DePete. And, you touched on a couple things, Lauren, and Chair Hamady, you touched on it the other day too, about diversity. And when you look at the NAC composition, there's an industry co-chair who we're going to get a new one this year, Warren Christie from JetBlue, replacing Chip Childs from SkyWest. And then the designated federal officer is now Brad Mims, who has really brought in with another focus of inclusion, equity, and diversity. And what's interesting too with that, and I want to echo again what you said the other day, the diversity in our expertise as well. And how many groups work in there. So, I wear an OEM hat in there, but then I think about how can I cross-pollinate the work that I do in CAST and all these other areas, and which is key. And, Lauren, you touched on it as well as how can we do better at connecting the dots within the different disciplines and the committees that we're on. And so behind the scenes of the NAC, there is a Datacom ad hoc subcommittee, and we meet every other Wednesday. And there is a lot of work that goes into that to prepare the NAC for the things that we're doing, making sure, the aircraft are being equipped. And it's not just airframe OEMs that are involved with it. It's, the manufacturers of, whether it's Honeywell or Collins or whomever, but everybody is involved in that. And we are very engaged and held to task so that when the Next Gen Advisory Committee comes open, which is open to the public, that people are ready. And the next item that's coming up now with the NAC is it runs every 2 years, you have a seat. And this year it's a little bit different. It's not just an automatic where you get your seat renewed. However, you got to reapply, even though you're an existing NAC member, which I think is key. And, taking a look at, and we were challenged at the NAC meeting a couple weeks ago of, are we diverse enough in all aspects of diversity and inclusion? And I think it's very healthy. It will take us into the next step of what's next. There's a lot of exciting things, and now that being in here for 3 years, looking at where we are today, where we were 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago when I joined, and then thinking about how exciting it is where we're going to be 2 to 3 years down the road. So a lot of good work taking place. But it just doesn't happen with the NAC. There's a lot of people working behind the scenes on that.
So these are 3 organizations and industry groups that already have day jobs, but they're getting together to work on trying to get industry and government together to be on the same page and trying to integrate these vehicles. And Joe, you and I think the problem statement came to us when we found out about a large airline that has a major hub in the center of the United States, and ended up having a spaceport announced 5 miles from the airport. And we also heard about a commercial pipeline using beyond the line of sight drones to inspect the pipeline through that airspace as well. And I know that's when you said it's time we have to start talking about this. We got to get involved. Got your microphone.
Well, first of all, I have to thank you all again. I have been waiting for this discussion for so long. And I thank you all, I know you all, and appreciate all the contributions that you've made. I mean, what you see here right now is a representation of all the users of the airspace. You also have somebody here from RTCA, the Radio Technical Commission on Aeronautics, who develops minimum operational performance standards and standards, generally speaking, for all kinds of aviation equipment. And then you have the NTSB right here. So this is just an amazing assembly of really talented people, as well as Craig, who has a little bit of everything, not only working for Airbus, but also everything he does with CAST. But I have to say, a while ago, and this is how ALPA sort of got involved in what Steve was talking about. Steve, I'm watching that clock, I promise.
Okay, I'm keeping you,
All right,
gotta keep you on time.
He knows how I can get. But I'm just so excited because this is really a unique time that we're living right now. When you see this technology, this new technology that's coming forward. So we have the AAAC, right, and all the wonderful things that they're doing right now, including the diversity, equity, and inclusion elements that we've put into there, and the safety culture. But really fascinating technology. It's life-saving technology being developed out there. Really incredible stuff, right? We have what we're doing in Next Gen, right? Trying to build a more efficient airspace, right? For going from a ground-based system to a space-based system, and doing that in the midst of challenges with 5G and now GPS problems, but we'll work on that. That's a whole nother subject, right? but doing some really good work there. RTCA in there working out and slugging out all the issues dealing with 5G and other issues. But, and CAST, right? The Commercial Air Safety Team doing everything to produce the data that has really helped define the change that we see in our safety record, right? I mean, just incredible SIS work and things like that. Now, the way we got involved is I got invited to a ComStack meeting, right? And Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee. And I sat there listening to the discussion that was underway between traditional aviation, which had been around a long time, right? We've been around a long time, and our incredible safety record, right? 10 to the minus 9 or 1/1000th of a chance of something going wrong. And the space community, right? Who's dealing with, it's not a new entrant in the airspace, but they have a tremendous new capability. I mean, we're seeing more and more launches, right? And so there was some friction between the launches and the way the FAA was having to close off large swaths of airspace, not dynamically managing that airspace in an effective and efficient manner, not investing in that at the time, really, truly in a way that we can reduce the impact, but it was happening, right? So there was concern with traditional aviation. Well, I'm one of those kind of people that looks for commonalities, not differences, right? So when they offered to, who wants to say a few words? So of course I grabbed the microphone and I said, look, you know, I'm a space geek. I just absolutely am fascinated by not only what's going on in AAAC in the drone community and advanced air mobility, but also I remember as a young kid watching space flights on TV with Walter Cronkite, for those of you who are old enough to remember who he is, and just being fascinated by it. So this was an opportunity for the airline pilots to get into what it does best, and that's collaborate and create unity. That's what we do. That's in our DNA, right? So we looked for low-hanging fruit, and I said, would you all like to get together and see if we can, you know, develop some commonalities on how we can all share the airspace system together, right? And work towards a goal, because we had to create a pathway for new entrants who haven't been here as long as we have been, create a new entrance for, or pathway for the commercial space industry that is just growing and growing, and basically coexist. And we started having a couple of meetings that were really, really productive. We did find out that we had common goals, and we did find out that we could agree on a pathway forward. So it's a really exciting time. And Karini done an amazing job right now with CSF and with ComStack, and I'm really excited about what the future holds. But we have to have, first of all, you know, we could use an FAA administrator. That would really help a lot, right? Don't you agree? I mean, we have to have an FAA administrator going on, you know, the way we've been right now. Nothing much is going to get done until we get an FAA administrator confirmed. So I'm really excited that there's an opportunity before us that we need to seize. There are tools available to us today to more dynamically manage that airspace and lessen the impact, because remember, all these different types of, you know, devices that we have flying around in the airspace system, they all have their unique characteristics and their benefits, right? I just mentioned the life-saving benefits that clearly drones have, but remember, space flight is the future of humanity. It really is. I mean, the things that we're able to do right now with space flight, you know, put tourism aside, which is, you know, obviously demonstrating an ability, but viewing our planet and the effects of, you know, the environment, the changes in our environment that we're able to do from space right now, and some of the experiments that we're doing. These are life-saving endeavors that are going on right now. And I want ALPA to be a part of that. And I think together we can accomplish more and we can go forward. But we need investment. We need investment from the FAA and buy-in from the FAA so that we can use the tools that we already have. Space Data Integrator, been around for a while, right? Are we effectively using it right now? Not really. The interface that takes place between knowing where this vehicle is in space and its need to be, the data to be relayed to the air traffic control system, through the ERAM program, is basically what they call a sneaker interface. It has to be manually delivered. You take the data from the Space Data Integrator and you manually input it into, into their system so they know where the aircraft is. That has to change, right? I mean, we have to have ready, reliable information so that we can give flight crews more information, so they can make more robust decision-making thing. And as the spaceflight community begins to grow and collect data and improve its efficiency and safety, that 10 to the minus 9, between 10 to the minus 9, 10 to the minus 6, begins to shrink. And so does that big swath of airspace that I just told you about. I mean, ultimately, what we want is a file and fly, just like what we do, coexisting in a seamless fashion. And that's what we're about at ALPA, and doing that in a safe way. So, thanks.
Oh, you bet, Joe. Thank you. And obviously, you can see the enthusiasm when you're working for the president who's this enthusiastic about just merging these aircraft together. It makes it easier for us to do the work at the lower level, to work with these individual groups. So thank you for that support.
And if I may.
Again?
If I may. No, listen, hey, this is my show. I'm sorry. No, I'm kidding. No. And I was at the Air Club, and I had the honor of being able to speak at the Air Club on behalf of ALPA. And I said, it's awful interesting. We are trying to end segregation of the airspace when a new entrant does something that impacts the rest of the airspace. Yet, the ComStack, right, Commercial Airspace Transportation Committee, and the Next Gen Advisory Committee, and the AAAC Committee, for the most part, we're all doing our work in a segregated way. Yeah. We're not fighting the way, we're not training the way we fight, right? And so what I'm saying is that perhaps there's a way to take the three efforts together, the representatives from all the different users of the airspace, and have an overarching shared mental model that we pilots like to call in the cockpit, and have a set of goals so that we take, with limited resources that we have, kind of take all those efforts and actually have a clearly defined direction and path, a point A to point B, with some defined goals, right? Well, no doubt, former ALPA and now president of the RTCA, the next morning, after he hears the speech, he hands me a piece of paper. This is how we can do it. This is how we can take the work of those three committees and combine it together and work towards a given end. And of course, the NTSB, I'm really, really pleased to hear the most recent announcement about the MOU, about how they can be involved in spaceflight and incidents that, they're plug and play. The way, if you know how the NTSB works, you know that they can plug in their model with SMEs to do the research that's necessary as things, in case something goes wrong. But anyway, Steve, back to you. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Joe. I
appreciate
it.
Get a little excited.
We're almost time to cue it. No, I'm kidding. Thank you.
And further, no.
And another thing.
And another thing.
No. You mentioned you were speaking with Terry, and Terry, you had the roadmap that you handed to Joe. Tell us what was in that. What's your thoughts? What do you think, seeing it from a 35,000-foot view, what these groups should be doing and how we should be interfacing with each other?
Well, thanks, Steve. Thanks, Joe, and appreciate the opportunity to be here. Always nice to be on this side of the organizational work that's done for the safety forum instead of on the staff and the pilot side of things that I used to be on. This is much easier, believe me. So thank you all for the work that you're doing. So I had met with Administrator Dixon probably 2 or 3 months before Joe's speech, and I had handed him this stick diagram of how the three advisory committees should really be working with that common mindset, as Joe said, and look at utilizing some more of the technical folks out there, whether it's standards development organizations like RTCA or ASTM or SAE, to really help feed in some of those technical solutions that could help the policymakers really put some of this stuff together. In my role at RTC, I see a lot of our members working on some just amazing new technologies. A lot of it in obviously in uncrewed operations, but also in fully crewed operations. And kind of back to that connect the dots thing, all these different activities that are going on is good, but it seems like every week I open up a magazine, I find out there's another group out there doing something. And so connecting those dots, I think, is going to be really important as an industry to work on some of these things together. We're developing new vehicles that have varying levels of capabilities, And but they have one thing in common, and that's is they need access to airspace. And getting that access to airspace is going to be a challenge because they're not making any more airspace. So we're going to have to be figuring out together across the different communities, how are we going to do things so we can get more efficient access to that airspace? One of the things that's being kicked around is we're working on a standard, for example, for detect and avoid, primarily, again, for the uncrewed operations. But what does that mean? How is that going to operate in a traditional environment? We're thinking there might have to be a whole new set of regulations. Some people are calling it digital flight rules that would actually allow, and I know this will sound scary, but will allow for vehicles to operate in clouds or near clouds without a clearance. And by the way, ALPA needs to be really involved if that thing gets kicked off because we're going to need pilot input on this. But those are the kind of things that we have to be thinking about, again, across not only traditional manned operations or crewed operations, but also the uncrewed operations, because we got to be thinking these things together so that collectively we can find new solutions for that airspace access. We can't do it in those silos. It's just not going to work. The other thing I'll add, as I talk to some of the industry folks, a lot of them seem to think that the FAA has some sort of ability to wave a magic wand over everything and it'll all come together. That's not going to happen. It's going to take industry coming together and coming to some common set of ideas and solutions that then can be taken to the FAA so that then they can develop the right things from a regulatory environment. The problem with that is there's a lot of folks out there in industry that have the solutions. The problem is there's 50, 60, 100 different solutions, and that's not going to work either. So everybody has to come together and come up with some basic ones that people can rally around, and then work with the FAA, because the FAA is not going to do it for us. It's just not the way it works, unfortunately. So it is up to industry, and again, ALPA, you got to be there because you've got a big role in this, and I know you will be because it's very important. Another advisory committee that's kind of involved with some of this work is one that I actually sit on, and that's the Research Engineering Development Advisory Committee, the REDAC. And there's a lot of research going on that is supporting both FAA research, but also the industry research, and the two are kind of trying to come together. And we need to, I look at things obviously from a standards point of view, but what are the role of standards in that research and development and implementation? And I say it is the standards that really help implement some of that new research and development, those new technologies. Because you have to have some standards that organizations can design and build to, and that the FAA can certify to. And without those, it becomes very inefficient. Right now, I think we do too much certifying by exception and special conditions, and I think having some basic standards that are required will help make things more efficient in that regard. Obviously, whether it's new entrants, new technologies, we need to be listening to each other. Obviously, they need to listen to us because we have a lot of experience in what it takes to keep that safety bar very high. They have to listen to us and really understand why it is we go through the things we do to ensure safety. They have to understand the language. SMS is a noun, it's not a verb. You don't SMS something. You have to understand safety risk management. But we have to listen to them too. We have to understand what their technologies they're bringing to the table. We have to understand what their capabilities are. Because one thing I've learned is that some of the things they're doing for uncrewed operations are applicable to crewed operations as well. And if some of those technologies can be put in our airplanes, it can really advance and enhance safety to another level. So all those things are very important. And my final item really is we've got to be working together early on. Joe mentioned the one thing that I hate to I wake up every morning and hope I don't hear the word 5G, but he already ruined it for me. But what we saw with the 5G issue is that nobody was talking to each other until everything came to a collision course. A lot of those discussions that are going on now are great, but they should have been going on 2 or 3 years ago. We have to be having these discussions with various parts of the industry during that planning and development phase, and not wait till the implementation phase. And if you wait till the implementation phase, it's too late. So working together and early.
Well, we're still on? I think we lost our microphones.
I think they lost Mike.
And
Hold
Joe
on.
is speaking now.
I'm speaking now. Hey, when you spoke yesterday, people are still talking about it. Was that a great speech yesterday? That was incredible. Oh my God, everybody in the hallway was coming down and somebody here. She's got to be next.
She's next.
Well, he didn't even ask the question.
Is Joe done? That's my favorite question. No, just kidding. Love you, brother.
Couple more months.
You know, we've been talking about the positive outcomes and working together and going through this, but I think part of the preparation for these discussions and these roundtables is what happens when we do have that bad day, when we have two vehicles come together. And where do we go? How do we use the expertise and what we know so far and develop into prevention and analytics for later? And with that, I look to the chair and ask Jennifer, where do we go with this and how can your organization help us?
Thanks very much. I'm glad you asked the question because I was going to start with, so when I was 5, just kidding. No, thank you very much. So everyone here is, I'm sure, very familiar with the National Transportation Safety Board. We're an independent agency, and we investigate accidents and incidents really in all modes of transportation and commercial space, and not all accidents and incidents in commercial space. But I do want to talk about the other modes of transportation just briefly, and then go into UAS and commercial space towards the end. You know, everybody in this room probably thinks about NTSB when we're talking aviation. Certainly the NTSB investigates every accident and incident in aviation and in the United States, and then we participate in others in accordance with Annex 13. And that includes unmanned aircraft systems, drones, advanced air mobility. Since 2007, we have conducted 56 investigations on UAS, and 3 of those include advanced air mobility. And so, but outside aviation, we have a really broad mandate, really, a big calling. And we have an Office of Highway Safety. We do everything from motor vehicle crashes to commercial trucking to pedestrian incidents and accidents to bicyclists, grade crossings. We have a railroad pipeline and hazardous materials division where we do all of those, including subway systems. We have an Office of Marine Safety, which handles all marine incidents, and those are in accordance with not just our mandate, but an MOU that was updated just last year by my predecessor and the Coast Guard to govern who's going to be leading what investigation, and of course whoever is not leading is always part of those investigations. I say that because we have a very broad portfolio. With that said, our investigative process is always the same. Whether it's highways, whether it's rail pipelines, hazmat, or marine safety, or as I said, aviation or commercial space, we have an approach, an investigative process that is always the same. The vehicles won't be the same. The information is not the same. The operators are not the same, and sometimes the federal agencies aren't the same, but the process is always the same. And, you know, I will say for UAS, just to point out, when I became chair last year, working with Dana Schultz, who many of you know is now our managing director. It took me some months to convince her from coming over from the Office of Aviation Safety and being the head career person for our agency, but she's very data-driven and very focused on safety. And we looked across the agency to see where our risks were. You know, we ask industry all the time to really look at risk and address that risk. Well, we have to do the same for us. And so we looked at, as part of that, our regulatory approach to across the modes. We are currently working on a rulemaking in rail to define substantial damage. We're currently working on a rulemaking in pipelines to define substantial damage. We issued an NPRM on commercial space accidents and incidents, and then we just finalized a rulemaking on unmanned aircraft, and we redefined the term unmanned aircraft accident. It used to be based on weight, which was 300 pounds, and now it's anything with an airworthiness certificate or airworthiness approval. And so that was just finalized, and so just to be aware of that. But on our expertise, and I'll get into the MOA in a minute, but on our expertise, I have to tell you across the agency, whether it's in our 4 modal offices or our research and engineering group, which handles everything in our labs, all our equipment, you know, CVRs, you name it, they are incredibly experienced. I often talk about how our agency has, we have 30% of our agency could retire tomorrow. And, you know, often people think, oh, that's a real risk, and it can be, but people stay for a very long time because they're committed to our mission, and they are incredibly talented and professional and really understand whether it's transportation or the issues that they're most responsible for. Now, moving to commercial space, we have been conducting space investigations since 1993, the most recent one in 2014, which was Spaceship Two. I am pleased to point out that Lorenda Ward, who was the investigator in charge of the Spaceship Two investigation, is the chief now, the new chief of a division that we have called the Air Carrier and Space Division within the NTSB. And Joe Sedor, who many of you may know, has now moved up to a chief technical advisor on space and aerospace technologies. And so we have a lot of expertise in the agency. We had 50 investigators at Columbia. And so it really is incredible, and I'm really proud of our entire agency and our workforce. If you think about our mission, and you think we only have 415 people, it's really incredible what they do on a daily basis. And so moving forward, we do have well over 80 people, 80 investigators who can investigate, whether it's commercial space. For aviation, it's well over 118. And or heading that way. I'm filling some vacancies right now, and then we have well over 30 people in our research and engineering staff. But just moving really quickly, because I see this clock ticking away. Joe says I don't have to worry. But moving back over to the memorandum of agreement with FAA. You know, we've had an MOA in place with DOT-wide since 1975. We've had an agreement in place with FAA specific to space since the 1980s, and the most recent one was in 2000. You know, in 2000, commercial human spaceflight was not a reality, and so we needed that updated. And when I came in, there was a rulemaking that just had sort of languished in the agency, and we put that forward. But putting that aside and really focusing on the MOA, We had a draft back since Debbie Hersman was chair with her name on it that we had at one point been still working with FAA. Well, now we had a situation where the NTSB has new leadership, the FAA and DOT has new leadership, and we could talk about the future and what needed to occur. Terry said, no one was talking around 5G and until we, were on a collision course. I think that was your quote. We don't want what happened with 5G to happen in any of our accident investigations. You don't wait to get the process set up. You don't wait for people to determine what are the roles and responsibilities, how are the two agencies going to coordinate, who needs to talk to who, and how do you proceed. And so this MOA lays out how the FAA and the NTSB will coordinate as two agencies going forward. And I'm happy to get into that more, but I don't want to take up all the time. I mean, Joe and I are both Italian, so we could really talk all day. So I will, I will yield back my time.
Thank you, Jennifer. Just as an advisory for our folks here on the panel, apparently it's just my microphone that's bad, so I'm going to use the hand mic, but you'll all be okay to keep going. Okay, so if we have this incident, obviously the NTSB and its staff have come up with expert probable causes that we can take to the industry and work with the FAA to try to implement to make our aviation side safer. If we get those findings, and I'm looking towards Karina and Lauren, if we get those findings and we move into your communities, are there any efforts or discussion on what we would take and how do we adapt that and bring that to our separate organizations, whether you're flying a UAS or a space vehicle? What vehicles are vehicles, what motions are in place once we get those findings, or what do we do to make change?
So I'll talk a little bit about it, but I think maybe the chair might have a little bit more input here. So there's a couple efforts going on right now within the space community. First and foremost, we're working on voluntary consensus-based standards for human spaceflight. We have a lot of challenges with that. Unlike many transportation industries, we're not common carrier, which means like the flying public gets into an airplane and they know what to expect. It's a tube with wings that uses Jet A that takes off from a runway and goes from point A to point B. Space is totally different, completely. I mean, if you can imagine any type of vehicle that is probably being developed somewhere around the world. So some are vertical takeoff, some are horizontal takeoff, some only go to suborbit, some go to orbit, some are balloons that have no propulsion, some have different types of propulsion. So the standards process that we're involved with now is going to be critical going forward to understand how the industry may be regulated in the future. That's probably the biggest difference and the reason that the industry is coming together to start talking about these things, because we recognize that there are no best practices. Everyone's got their own vehicle that they're developing. The operator is the manufacturer. In our case. So there's a lot to learn still in our industry. And I guess I'll leave it at that if anyone else wants to chime in.
Great insight. Thank you, Karina. And Lauren, what about in your community? What are we going to do with some recommendations or data sharing to try to?
So I think there's a lot of work that's actually starting and is taking shape because of a lot of work, and ALPA's been involved in a bunch of it. If you think back to the Drone Advisory Committee, and when it first was stood up a few years ago, now the AAAC, the CAST, Commercial Aviation Safety Team, has been involved, and they created a subgroup, if you will, that was with many of those folks called the Drone Safety Team. And a lot of things that new operators don't really have any sense of is things like safety management systems and so forth. And this Drone Safety Team, with help from ALPA, a lot of help, kind of put together these small packages to say, this is how you can start, and this is what you need to think about. I think one of the issues they have, of course, is they have these new AAM operators that may be wanting to operate large fleets in regional air mobility and local air mobility and so forth, as well as drone operators that they may be out doing pipelines and inspecting rail or whatever they're doing. So they have a little bit of a different approach. And then some of them you just have the guy flying his P-51 that maybe never thought about sharing information before. And I've told these groups, If you think to the aviation industry 30 or 40 years ago, when we started talking about sharing data, there was a lot of us, myself included, that said, that's not going to happen because somebody's going to take me to court next week if I share this data. But look what we got out of that. I remember at the time I ran a group of dispatchers at a big airline when the dispatching of the ASAP program for dispatchers came out. And my first thought was, oh, sure, this is just going to be, this is more paperwork for me to do. What are we going to get out of this? I was shocked because after 5 or 6 months, the data we collected, I realized instantly, wow, look at this, 10 reports of the same thing from different dispatchers that we weren't training correctly. And so we took that and baked it into the training program. I think those are the kind of examples that I like to give to these new operators, and a lot of them are getting that. The guy with the P51 will probably take a little bit longer, but if you think of some of these new AAM types and so forth, they really are starting to understand. And to go back earlier to a piece that was, a discussion piece that was made about multiple FAAs, I think, and maybe you said it, Steve, or maybe it was Terry. I met, this is a year and a half or so ago, with a new entrant operator building AAMs, and we were talking about safety and how important it was. And he said, well, we talked to the FAA and they really like our concept. I said, okay, which FAA? And he sort of looked at me like I had two heads, and then he said, well, it was, Fred Fritz or whatever the person's name was. And I said, oh, well, that guy's in certification. So he's looking at your vehicle and saying, yeah, I think it'll probably fly. I said, that's step one. I said, there are about 7 or 8 more steps to go through, particularly if you're talking about one day operating in the same environment, and if you're going to carry something for hire, whether it starts off as a box and eventually as a person. There's a lot of steps involved. And I think that message is starting to get out there, and I think through the AAAC and the NAC and ComStack and REDAC that Terry's on, if we can figure out a way to better connect those dots, I think it'll help. NASA has also done a lot of tremendous work in this area. I sit on some of these NASA panels, and I think it's great work, but I still worry about how do we get all this connected.
No, great points, Lauren, and that's exactly it. I mean, that sums up the issue that's there, and again, your community, we've seen, you're not a new entrant. The people these new vehicles are coming in, they're coming in at a fast pace, and we appreciate the work that the AAAC is doing. We've got just a couple more minutes, and I'm probably just going to throw out this one last question for the group to talk about. When we start to speak about a for-profit business working with another for-profit business, who gets priority? Which business gets the priority of that space? Obviously, we can't have vehicles in the same airspace at the same time, but any thoughts? This is an open question to the panel. Is there a way to prioritize? Is there a way we can work together to figure out? Because again, just I'm not picking on space flight, but there's a lot of airspace that's protected for using those vehicles. Is there a way past that? Can we come to an agreement where the airlines that are obviously trying to make money, the drone operators that are flying through pipelines that go right past an airport, is there a way that we can all coexist? Where can we have that discussion? In these groups or at other venues? It's an open question. And Joe would like it.
Sure, I'll give that a shot. Best equipped, best served, I don't know. I was just going to say, if we were to attack this in a situation where we all got in the same room and worked together with the common goal of full integration, right? And understanding, though, the limitations and the path that's going to be necessary to do it, right? I came across one interesting tool. Is his name Greg? The fellow from MITRE today. Is he here?
Kyle.
Yeah, Kyle. Is Kyle here still? Hey, Kyle. So I got a fascinating presentation one time on a program they were working on. It was a model called Surface to Space. And it basically was a computer algorithm that could actually, you can input the data of all users of the airspace. Imagine being able to put every vehicle, space, drone, aircraft, with the performance capabilities of those vehicles, together with a regulatory overlay. In other words, an existing regulatory overlay as it exists today, right? Now, obviously, we're talking super process here of a lot of information. But be able to say to ourselves and try to attack this more intelligently by saying, if we did this one thing, how would it affect the whole thing, right? And obviously it would take great investment to do that, but it is a tool that, the first tool that I ever heard of, that actually might be able to take us down that road to make intelligent, informed decisions. That'd be my opinion. But want to try it?
We don't regulate for-profit corporations, but, you know, obviously we do accident investigations and focus on, you know, really, we actually hope we aren't in business. We're probably the one federal agency that hopes we never have to show up, but on the worst days we do. And, you know, I will comment on one thing, which is our coordination with FAA and our agency. I do want to briefly mention that we have an incredible working relationship with the FAA. Sure, we disagree many times on different issues in aviation and UAS, on space, but we rely on each other to be able to improve safety, and that's both our goals. So I just wanted to comment that moving forward, the FAA and the NTSB for our MOU have different roles and responsibilities, but we are in coordination, and I didn't, just in case FAA is listening, I did want to just acknowledge how much I appreciate them in their work.
I'll just add too, I mean, if you, I can't say what gets priority, you know, a passenger carrying airplane or a commercial space flight operation, but one of the things I believe, again, looking at it from the standards perspective, is you give priority to the ones that meet the standard. And you have to decide what that standard is, some sort of operational performance standard, which is what we do. But you define that, and those operators that can meet that standard get the access, whatever that is. You know, I'm talking theoretical, of course, but that certainly can be a differentiator, because right now, in some of these different airspace access sort of things, there are no standards. It's a free-for-all out there a little bit. But everybody's focusing strictly on the vehicle capability or the technology capability, not the, you know, the operational capability in the entire environment. So you've got to develop some sort of boundaries on these things so that you can figure out who does have priorities in there.
Steve, if I may, and I see the zeros are up here flashing, but I'm kind of wearing a two-billed hat right now. Sitting up here, a few things really resonated with me, to kind of, from a CAS perspective and then also from a NAC perspective. There's a lot of work being done, and you know, if I was to word cloud a few things, it's, you know, connecting the dots, because we have a lot of limited resources with time and people. And we need to start challenging ourselves, and I think it's a good step forward from the venue that we're in here today in this discussion as to, I'm sure that some of these groups are doing the same work, and how can we support one another and not be redundant?
Right.
That's one. Two is, you know, we always talk, and always, shouldn't say always and never, however, we talk about in safety programs reactive, proactive, predictive, and you think about the founding of CAST in 1997, it started out reactive to all the accidents. And Jennifer, you mentioned something, you know, where we're talking about a crash. You know what, we don't want a crash, whatever that looks like. Right. So, because then we're going to become reactive. And I think when we look at the shared airspace, we need to take a look at how can we be more predictive, proactive before we have a crash, if you will. And Terry, you know, when you talked to the Administrator Dixon a couple years ago, you know, whether the dust is blown off of that, but I think, you know, what is the glue that kind of brings us all together and keeps it together, but yet where the glue is so sticky, it just sticks us to the floor, you know, to where we have resilience in that. So that's my closing thought, Steve. Thank you.
I'll be really quick.
No worries.
We absolutely want the same thing. And to Captain DePete's point just a moment ago, which is, you know, safe and efficient use of the airspace for everyone of the NAS. Space launches don't take 4 hours. Space launches take about 10 minutes. Right now, the launch window is pretty wide, from start to finish, and the FAA and other, players in the airspace system are very conservative with closing that airspace for a long period of time. We're working together on a regular basis per launch to really help shrink those windows as much as we can. And as the industry grows and develops, that conservatism of those hazard areas will come down substantially. So that's what I think everyone is really striving for, is being able to integrate all vehicles into the NAS within a few minutes at a time.
I would just add real quickly that I think one of the pieces that's really starting to take hold with the new operators is around safety again, and I give ALPA tremendous credit for that. ASIAS is now being talked about, for example, by the group that represents a lot of these uncrewed vehicle systems, AUVSI is its name, where they are now entering into some agreements to start looking at how could ASIAS be used by operators in this new entrant world. And I think there's a big recognition, and one of the things that I've said sort of in side rooms and so forth with people is, to these new entrants, is the last thing you want is to have an accident. Because if something happens bad, you could be legislated out of business overnight. I mean, it wouldn't